What if the ultimate victor of this geopolitical crisis is simply a quiet group of London marine insurance underwriters? The legendary A-10 Warthog currently shreds Iranian surface forces, but the macroeconomic reality remains totally bleak. The incredibly powerful US Navy actively struggles to secure the most critical global energy logistics choke point today. 120 warships represents the exact number of hostile Iranian vessels the American fleet recently destroyed. 2 massive carrier strike groups and 8 Aegis destroyers confidently project $40 billion of naval supremacy. And yet, the terrifying macroeconomic reality proves the vital Strait of Hormuz remains totally closed to commercial trade. 95% of international shipping has completely vanished, while 3,000 oil tankers safely sit anchored. The dominant American naval forces did not lose a single major warship during this massive geopolitical combat campaign. We systematically eliminated their entire submarine fleet and ruthlessly destroyed every major surface combatant vessel. And yet, the global shipping lane stays totally paralyzed while the halted oil flow continuously damages the world economy. The fundamental geopolitical reason for this massive economic paralysis is a calculated strategy called a fleet in being. Tehran cleverly utilizes this constant threat of cheap attack vessels to essentially blackmail global commercial markets. This escalating international conflict is definitely not a traditional naval battle, but a campaign of economic attrition. The most powerful maritime fleet in human history was forced to urgently contact the Air Force to deploy a Cold War jet. This 50-year-old mechanical airplane was initially designed to violently destroy massive Soviet tank formations in Europe. Arrogant defense officials historically labeled this rugged aircraft entirely obsolete until the global supply chain collapsed. To fully understand why a massive carrier strike group cannot solve this geopolitical crisis, we must carefully analyze the water. The strategic Strait of Hormuz is definitely not just a simple maritime geographical feature for massive commercial cargo ships today. This highly contested region actively functions as a heavily restricted 6-mile littoral combat environment weaponized by the state. The powerful American blue water naval supremacy becomes entirely meaningless inside this incredibly congested and dangerous corridor. Hostile regional powers successfully transformed this narrow coastal maritime transit lane into a terrifying geopolitical choke point. The Revolutionary Guard currently deploys an asymmetric maritime sovereignty network containing over 1,500 vessels. These highly maneuverable FIAC platforms are definitively not just simple speedboats, but highly calculated geopolitical strike tools. They deliberately function as an incredibly cheap asymmetrical force designed to completely shatter traditional maritime combat rules. Constructed primarily from cheap composite materials, these tiny assault crafts seamlessly blend into heavy civilian maritime traffic. The fastest operational models easily exceed 70 knots, while heavily carrying exceptionally lethal anti-ship explosive payloads. State-sponsored military engineers deliberately constructed these tiny vessels to constantly ride extremely low along the ocean waves. This highly calculated maritime engineering choice actively allows them to successfully evade early detection by modern naval radars. Their primary geopolitical doctrine involves launching massive coordinated swarms to deliberately overwhelm sophisticated defense grids. This aggressive state-sponsored effort actively seeks to completely neutralize the incredible technological advantage of Western fleets. Launching dozens of these disposable explosive boats from completely unpredictable directions creates absolute mechanical radar chaos. The defending tactical action officer must rapidly process this highly chaotic operational picture before the defense network collapses. This calculated swarm strategy deliberately forces an incredibly expensive destroyer to make absolutely impossible targeting decisions. The ultimate goal is to completely paralyze the maritime logistical infrastructure that heavily supports the global financial economy. The fundamental vulnerability of American global maritime hegemony completely revolves around the strategic cost-exchange ratio. Let us carefully examine the absolutely terrifying financial mathematics surrounding a single advanced interceptor missile launch. Deploying one highly sophisticated SM-6 defensive weapon currently costs the American taxpayer over $4 million today. Executing a multi-million-dollar kinetic strike against a remarkably cheap composite boat represents a total doctrinal bankruptcy. The legendary Harpoon weapon system was meticulously engineered to aggressively hunt massive enemy cruisers across the open ocean. That massive anti-ship missile fundamentally struggles to strategically acquire incredibly tiny targets moving through heavy waves. Deploying the mighty F-18 Super Hornet requires exactly $30,000 of aviation fuel for every single hour of flight. Those magnificent supersonic fighters travel entirely too fast to properly identify highly camouflaged threats on the dark water. The heavy 5-inch naval artillery battery confidently fires 20 explosive rounds per minute against a standard heavy target. That respectable mechanical firing rate becomes completely mathematically irrelevant when actively swarmed by 50 hostile skiffs. A standard defensive automated turret completely exhausts its entire ammunition capacity in exactly 20 terrifying seconds. The mechanical reloading process requires 4 agonizing minutes, while dozens of explosive vessels actively breach the perimeter. The hostile asymmetric doctrine is heavily engineered to systematically exhaust the expensive vertical launch tubes of the fleet. Committing highly expensive blue water munitions into an incredibly congested brown water environment is absolute financial suicide. The mighty American military proudly brought a highly sophisticated surgical laser into a chaotic, geopolitical coastal knife fight. The legendary A-10 Thunderbolt currently serves as the ultimate macroeconomic equalizer capable of rescuing global logistics. This highly rugged attack jet completely shatters the fundamental economic attrition strategy deliberately deployed by Tehran. That massive 7-barrel Gatling cannon rapidly delivers highly destructive depleted uranium munitions at incredible velocity. The brutal geopolitical mathematics reveal that a standard combat firing burst costs exactly $130. That incredibly cheap kinetic strike effortlessly obliterates a heavily armed Iranian attack vessel valued at thousands of dollars. Executing that specific maritime strike, utilizing a massive defense interceptor, guarantees the complete financial ruin of the fleet. Deploying this devastating kinetic firepower permanently disrupts the highly calculated maritime supply chain of the hostile state. The massive mechanical roar of that heavy cannon makes a continued geopolitical blockade entirely financially unsustainable for Iran. For engaging highly evasive threat vectors, the capable pilot safely utilizes incredibly cheap laser-guided rocket munitions daily. The calculated macroeconomic cost for each precision-guided rocket launch is exactly $35,000 from the budget. Firing an infrared-guided Maverick missile costs roughly $150,000, which remains a massive strategic win. This incredibly rugged machine forcefully restores a highly favorable macroeconomic balance for the entire global energy market today. This highly specialized combat mission officially designates the heavily armored aircraft for persistent strike coordination and reconnaissance. The rugged Warthog fundamentally functions as an active geopolitical observation post, continuously monitoring the contested territorial waters. An advanced stealth fighter heavily relies on incredible supersonic speeds to maintain aerodynamic lift and tactical survivability. Crossing this narrow geopolitical choke point at supersonic velocity physically limits surface observation time to mere seconds. Distinguishing a state-sponsored proxy suicide vessel from a legitimate commercial fishing trawler at those extreme speeds is impossible. The heavily armed attack aircraft deliberately maintains a remarkably slow cruising velocity of exactly 300 knots. This highly deliberate operational speed provides the military aviator significantly more time to conduct detailed optical analysis. The experienced pilot absolutely relies on direct visual confirmation to clearly identify bolted rocket launchers and hostile intent. This uninterrupted chain of visual target acquisition effectively sanitizes the designated littoral corridor without causing international diplomatic incidents. What is currently unfolding above these highly contested waters genuinely represents a masterclass in unified force projection. The rugged Air Force jet actively maintains regional stability without operating entirely isolated from Allied naval assets. This highly complex combat integration heavily relies on direct targeting data continuously provided by capable Navy helicopters. Those highly advanced MH-60R Seahawk rotorcraft actively illuminate hostile proxy vectors for the heavy aerial attack platform. When the burning sun completely vanishes over the dark Gulf, the terrifying AC-130 gunships actively assume nocturnal overwatch. This meticulously coordinated overlapping network of interbranch military power effectively secures the entire congested geopolitical corridor. By deliberately outsourcing the chaotic surface engagement to heavy aircraft, the massive guided missile destroyers conserve strategic arsenals. The incredibly powerful naval warships finally preserve their highly expensive vertical launch system tubes for truly existential ballistic threats. The highly sophisticated Aegis combat network fundamentally remains the absolute core protective shield for the entire maritime region. Iran committed a highly catastrophic geopolitical blunder by arrogantly assuming the traditional blue water fleet would fight entirely alone. The incredibly adaptable American military completely rewrote the literal tactical playbook overnight to achieve total regional hegemony. The ultimate strategic conclusion of this highly complex geopolitical equation remains incredibly straightforward for global military planners. Sustaining absolute maritime hegemony is fundamentally achieved by deploying the correct strategic tool rather than the most expensive machine. The powerful conventional navy was practically engineered for deep ocean superpower engagements utilizing massive capital surface ships. This highly congested regional environment absolutely demands incredibly durable aircraft carrying heavy kinetic cannons and affordable munitions. The ultimate geopolitical irony is that the absolutely perfect weapon is an old jet that the modern military completely rejects. Spending exactly $10,000 per confirmed kill easily outclasses violently launching a multi-million-dollar strategic interceptor. The massive American military-industrial complex constantly prioritizes manufacturing incredibly sophisticated and highly profitable defense technology. Arrogant defense officials constantly dream of futuristic laser platforms flying thousands of nautical miles above the geopolitical theater. However, the brutal reality of the Persian Gulf violently shatters those expensive dreams with incredibly cheap explosive proxy vessels. Global hegemony fundamentally operates as a brutal economic contest, where the empire that exhausts its financial resources totally collapses. Tehran fully understands this brutal economic reality and deliberately designed an asymmetric strategy to bankrupt the American superpower. They completely lack the massive industrial capacity to rapidly construct giant nuclear supercarriers or modern stealth cruisers. Their incredibly pragmatic coastal engineers actively mass-produce thousands of tiny disposable boats equipped with exceptionally cheap explosives. Without the continuous protective presence of the slow, heavily armored Warthog, the entire international strait remains a geopolitical trap. A massive global macroeconomic depression would violently strike immediately if commercial oil shipments completely ceased moving through there. International insurance firms entirely rely on the guaranteed kinetic destruction of these small proxy boats to safely underwrite global cargoes. The incredibly brutal mechanical roar of the heavy Gatling cannon literally ensures that the global financial system survives every day. Yet arrogant military politicians stubbornly refuse to properly acknowledge the undeniable strategic value of this highly rugged airplane. They actively argue that the aging airframe cannot possibly survive a contested airspace dominated by modern surface-to-air missile networks. That highly specific argument completely ignores the fundamental reality that this regional conflict is clearly not a traditional superpower air battle. The heavy attack jet safely flies extremely low, securely under the protective umbrella explicitly provided by the massive guided missile destroyers. It actively operates as an incredibly lethal tactical extension of the naval surface fleet, rather than an independent strategic bomber. Retiring this perfectly adapted mechanical machine without a highly capable direct combat replacement is a totally unforgivable geopolitical error. A sophisticated military drone carrying a few light missiles simply cannot physically replicate the sustained kinetic deterrence of a heavy cannon. Modern directed energy weapons are totally wonderful, until a massive swarm of 50 explosive vessels suddenly brutally attacks your isolated warship. When that terrifying geopolitical scenario finally unfolds, the isolated warship desperately requires an endless stream of depleted uranium bullets. Fundamental tactical engineering reality dictates that you simply cannot successfully hammer a rusted nail utilizing a delicate glass wrench. The narrow shipping lanes absolutely do not care about the incredible billions of dollars eagerly spent on classified stealth fighter programs. Those violently dangerous brown waters simply demand raw kinetic deterrence, continuously delivered at a highly sustainable macroeconomic price point. Our military leadership must thoroughly study this specific regional conflict and absolutely refuse to abandon highly proven geopolitical tools. The ultimate global tactical victor is fundamentally determined strictly by the brutal logical mathematics of simple strategic cost-exchange ratios. We strictly refuse to blindly worship the highly sophisticated weapon because we deeply worship the brutal operational mathematics of surface combat. The powerful U.S. Air Force actively fights to permanently retire the legendary Warthog completely by the final end of this current decade. Imagine a terrifying future where this legendary jet is entirely sent to the boneyard and permanently removed from active geopolitical duty. Following that absolutely disastrous retirement, a massive lethal swarm of 500 proxy FIACs violently breaches the coastal strait. What specific tactical military asset can properly step in to fill this massive strategic power vacuum without completely bankrupting the empire? Let me clearly know your exact tactical military solution and detailed geopolitical defense plans safely down in the active comments below.